Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about connectivity simplified for the commercial interior space. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar today is being presented by ConnectTrack. When retrofitting or reconfiguring a space, cable management, power, and data delivery can present a number of challenges for facilities, and this webinar will discuss how to achieve a seamless and subtle integration of power and data into your surroundings, whether a new construction or a retrofit, and to ensure your design plans have convenient access to power and data. So before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions in the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time for the speaker, and they'll be addressed after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access that question box. Also, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty or have another type of question, please send a message to us in that question section as well, and someone will answer you. If you are interested in continuing education credits, please note you'll receive a certificate of attendance for this webinar, and that will be in an email from Facility Executive after the event. You can report this to your association for continuing education credits. So now I'd like to introduce your speaker today, and that's Steve Batchelder. Steve is a passionate person who has devoted 20 years to helping people in the buildings world. He's the director of sales for ConnectTrack, and he's previously worked in the buildings industry helping contractors. But also as a speaker and trainer, he enjoys showcasing solutions that work in the real world. So for 5 years, Steve has traveled across North America meeting with facility managers to better understand the issues that they are facing and to bring those thoughts back to ConnectTrack's product development team, where they have responded by creating solutions that people need out in the facilities world. Now I will hand it over to Steve. And Steve?
Okay, thank you, Ann. Thank you, everyone, for attending this, and hopefully it's going to be very practical for you as we're going to be talking about some really specific real-life situations that either I've seen or been involved in or witnessed from other people, because I think those are the things that are going to help you as you're facing some of your real situations. Most weeks, as she had mentioned, I travel. I live in Michigan, just so you know a little extra about me, and my office is in Dallas. And so if I'm not in one of those two locations, I'm usually with the facility managers team, engineers, architects, or designers. And over the years, they have shared a lot of information with me, and I'm hoping today that some of their questions and maybe some of their ideas will come across in this webinar. I also know that you're here for a specific reason, and even though we don't have instant feedback, I want to value your time and answer your questions. So if at any time during this presentation you think of, I'm going to get my screen going here. If any time you have any questions, type it in. I'll address it in the second half, which is where we've placed the questions and answers. But first, let me give you a little history of who we are, a brief history. We're ConnectTrack. We're a manufacturer committed to facility managers. We're a corporate sustaining partner with IFMA, if you're familiar with them. We also are an important partner with NFM&T, the National Facilities Management and Technology. I realize that your job, facilities manager's job, is to make things work. I was in Harvard a couple of weeks ago talking to a facility manager team, and I said to them, in the school that I was at, it was an older building, what is the biggest thing you have to deal with as a facility management team? And they said, because this building was built in 1900 or right around there, the biggest thing we struggle with is consistent heat. So whether it's an HVAC system or your power grid, each facility has to keep going, no matter what's going on. So even though I can't help you with the heat, I can help you with the power, and I can help you with the connectivity today. Actually, our CEO, Clint Strong, invented one of the solutions that we'll mention today, but I'm also going to be discussing all of the options available to you. So if you are struggling to keep up with your clients' demands to have power at their fingertips, maybe I can help you today. Let's look at some of the problems that occur when you have to provide connectivity. First of all, traveling all over, I believe that owners of buildings and clients make very unrealistic demands for moves, adds, and changes on your team. I put it down, they think of facility managers as wizards who can make power and data magically appear anywhere they want it to be. If only it was that easy, right? The reality is, in order for you to make this happen, several other things have to occur. Here are some of the things, if you're going to normally bring in power into a space, that has to happen. Overtime hours have to be given, so you can work on overtime or on weekends. If you have other tenants in the facility, which you usually do, they have to be either moved or inconvenienced due to the construction. Even if somebody says, I want power right there, the slab conditions often dictate what are some available options. Another one that has to occur is disruption and mess always have to be accounted for. There's going to be either water coming through that hole that you're going to put in the concrete. There's going to be dust all over that you have to tape off. Many of you work in a clean environment where you have to have things taped off and cleaned that way. Downtime is inevitable. The project timeline and budget are almost always too small, and one size usually doesn't fit everything. So with all of that said, let me make this practical. This is a typical scenario that I see. I actually took this picture. I was walking through one of our clients, our customers' facilities where they were doing a lot of renovation like this. And I said, can I take this picture? And the facility manager was very embarrassed and said, well, you can take the picture if you don't tell anyone where you saw it, because they were embarrassed about it. And yet we're used to seeing this every day. I'm assuming if you looked around your facility right now, you might find something very similar to this. In fact, one of the largest automobile manufacturers, remember I live in Michigan, one of the largest automobile manufacturers were remodeling several of their buildings with the most expensive, latest furniture in this open space design. The problem was that even in their new large meeting rooms, there was a telecommunications cable running on the floor under every table. Now, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but I will say that after our meeting, they redesigned things so that there are no more visible cables laying on the floor. So before we look at some of the newest methods available, these trending methods, these three most popular to bring out power and connectivity, let's see what some of the most used methods I see across the country. I don't have a top 10 David Letterman list, but this is my facility manager list I see when I travel around. Now, I can't ask you to raise your hand as to what approach you use, but I'll list a few of these. My favorite is still the tape and extension cord method. Sometimes people use creative tape, colors, all kinds of things, but this is what they do. This is what you have to do. You have to make it safe as you can. The image on the right actually came from a facility, a courtroom, where the witnesses would have to walk over that gaff tape and those cat cables to take the witness stand. I asked them, because they were getting ready to change it with one of the new systems that I'm going to show you today. I asked them, does that still work? And they said it still works. So sometimes it's a miraculous gaff tape, even when it's ripped open. Here's another one. It's sort of an upgrade. This is a popular approach. It's a rubber floor cord cover. And there's a variety of these types. That first one, that roll-up approach, you've all used this probably. A piece of rubber with a space inside to place your cable. The concept is good, but I've never seen one actually lay flat for more than a few minutes. It's almost like you need to heat it up, make it pliable, lay it down quick, and hope it doesn't get kicked or moved. The other rubber approach on the right-hand side that you see is more of a solid rubber cover, which definitely works. I was in Colorado looking at a company that installs top-of-the-line audio-visual equipment in commercial spaces. It was very high-tech stuff that I would drool over. It was expensive, amazing, and they were showing me this equipment they put into these meeting rooms, and then I looked at the end of the meeting room and saw one of these rubber bumps, rubber ramp. It's acceptable in a warehouse, but not in a classy space that's bringing in your most important clients. Now, this was not the image, but this is another one that you see how these rubber bumps are being used. Now, we're going to go with another maybe upgrade. I see this a lot, the Velcro cord cover or something like this. It's popular because it's easy to lay down on the carpet, not like the rubber one. It looks like it's more thought out than the gaff tape, but it still allows cables to be stepped on. And this is an important note. According to the National Electric Code, these cords, extension cords, are only to be used in temporary situations, not permanently with proper electrical wiring. In other words, according to one of the codes, and I won't quote these, if you want these numbers, I will certainly send them to you, that an extension cord cannot be used as a substitute for fixed wiring. Another one of the codes in the NEC, the National Electric Code, the current code says this: every meeting room is required to have at least one wired, hardwired receptacle in the floor. Often we kind of cheat and we put these down because we are being asked to do something which is next to impossible, requiring that facility manager wizard. So this is why it happens. State Farm, which we all know, insurance agencies happen to have a lot of control, has an extension cord safety article. And in their article, they say two things that I want you to remember today. Never tape extension cords to the floor. And second thing, don't run cords under the rugs. I have been in many facilities where they have taken their cords, their cables, and just laid extra carpet tiles over top of them. I've been in one where they had caution tape all over with signs applied on the floor to watch your step. And you probably had to do so many of these similar things to meet the demands that you have as a superhero facility manager wizard. Now let me identify some of the more permanent solutions you might be using that might be causing you unnecessary frustration, delays, sometimes extra expense. Facility managers are doing these things not because they love them, but because they have to. The first one is power poles. They're easy to install, but the word I often hear associated with power poles is this: hate and no. No, we will never put another power pole in our space. They used to be more common and accepted because we had cubicle farms that had their internal power, and they would just have a few of these power poles. But today, people expect to plug in their devices wherever they are. And if that's the case, this would require power poles to be everywhere, which eliminates good design, eliminates this positive work environment that your staff is trying so hard to do. So I think we can admit it that power poles are practical and cheap. They're just really not design focused. They're not pretty. I can only imagine if you would leave this webinar today and say, well, let's put some more power poles in, what would happen? You'd probably be starting a new job search, is my guess. Another common approach we've seen for decades in commercial offices and other spaces is floor core drilling, where they're drilling through a floor slab to install poke-through device. It works fine when connectivity needs were limited just a couple of spaces, maybe an occasional group of cubicles. But it's important to note that once that person in this image moves, drills that hole and puts in a poke through, when a room needs to be configured, you cannot move that hole. It's permanent. You have to put in a new one. So this involves all of those pain points we mentioned early: overtime, mess, relocating people, downtime, and expense. Here's a guy who is x-raying a slab so he can locate. He's looking for rebar, cables, and steel before he drills a core. These things are messy. They're complicated. You all know this, and you know you can't do this when people are trying to work either in that area or the room below the slab, even a room adjacent to it. The drilling and the noise is way too much. Your budget always goes up when you consider these limited, non-movable core drills. So if your space, though, is on a concrete slab on grade, as we call them, then one option we've always used historically is concrete trenching. Allows you to put in the conduits and your connection devices in these trenches and boxes. Talk about messy. This is something you cannot do after a space is occupied. It's very expensive. It's inflexible. Again, you cannot move any slab if the furniture needs to change, and it will change. I was in California talking to a facility team of a large corporation who had 2 scheduled days each week to move their office spaces. I questioned them on that. You have 2 days every week to move offices? They say Friday is our heavy moving day, where we move cables, power, infrastructure type things. And Wednesday was more for their light moves, changing out furniture, chairs, things like that. So things are moving. Maybe not that often in your space, so let's hope not. So what I see in our world is that no design that you currently have is future-proof. Here's what I mean. So even if you have a new remodeled space, it's done ahead of time, sometimes months, weeks. It's actually done way earlier than the time it's going to get occupied by someone. That means that on the day of occupancy, there are probably already changes that need to be made. The way we deliver power and data has to be flexible enough to adapt to some of these changes. This drawing that I have on the screen is actually our office. We moved in this space 2 years ago. You see 2 call-out sections, 2 bubbles. There are actually 3, but only 2 on this screen. We moved in our space 2 years ago. We looked around, new furniture, we're excited and said, wow, we have so much room. Finally, we have what we need. We can play football in here. And in less than a few months, we needed to change some things and add to our original plan. You all know what I mean when I'm describing what happened to our office. So a year goes by, and we added many more spaces, and the design had to change again. All of this in 2 years. 2 years, 3 different changes. You can see how important it was to have a non-disruptive way to make changes to power and data connectivity without having to trench our slab on grade space. As I mentioned to you, I do a lot of traveling. And so I was traveling in Manhattan to this very unique spot. This is the remodeled interior space of Sony. If you don't know, they own most of the music that we listen to and most of the movies. And they have a cool space which showcases their image all throughout their building. So they were remodeling this whole space. The problem was that after hiring a leading architectural and design firm to create the ultimate office space, in 6 months, they needed to add more people. They sent their team out. They searched throughout their floors to find space, find angled corners, find spaces adjacent to columns, or anywhere they could find any extra room. They found some space, but the problem was, how do they get power and connectivity to these? How do they add these work areas without shutting the rest of the office down? I will let you know, they did not core drill, they did not trench, and they certainly wouldn't use power poles. They use one of the systems that I am going to talk about today. The last traditional option that people generally use, I'm sorry, this is the design space for Sony. The last traditional option I'll mention is the raised floor. The non-HVAC floor, which is added after construction, works fine to distribute power and connectivity, but usually isn't worth the tremendous expense and the added retrofit modifications that are required for the ramping around the office, the doors and around other spaces. This is definitely the most expensive option that is so minimally used that I will not be expanding on it in this webinar. So we've talked about these things, but what I really want to talk about, and I think this is what you're at this seminar, this webinar for, is what are the newest simple methods to help you connect. If the traditional permanent type solutions don't work well, and we know they don't, and the temporary cord covers don't meet electrical codes, then we need to know what are the trending options available to make connectivity simple and easy to do. So if you think about a full floor of a building and the options for horizontally distributing power and data cabling in its space, the answer is the floor. We need connectivity at the furniture, right? And the furniture sits on the floor. So let's use the floor to distribute the connectivity to the furniture in a way that's economical, flexible, and adaptable. And that's where we come to these three newest methods of floor distribution. They all have key benefits that might work best in your space. So let me explain them to you and show you their good features and maybe one of the negatives that occur with each one of these spaces. The one down and dirty alternative is to simply mount a low profile raceway on top of your floor surface. You might have seen this one as it's from one of the largest electrical wiring manufacturers literally in the country. It's designed for things like conference rooms, low traffic areas. It provides power and data cabling. It's a pretty simple ADA compliant system. It has a top and bottom steel shell that has raw wires inside this raceway. At the wall, which you can't see in this image, but under the workspace also, it has devices that the electrical contractor wires to provide you with the connectivity you need. It's often used because contractors are already familiar with other wall-mounted channels this company produces. And so they go to their supply house, purchase this for the horizontal floor distribution. It actually works good. It meets a need. But because of the lack of design, really, it's a pretty pragmatic elemental system. It's best used in low or no traffic areas. One of the things I've heard often, I was in Pittsburgh and a group said, hey, can I show you something we just installed a month ago? And they brought me to this system, and it's a very good system. It works really good. But they said, look at it. The only issue with this, besides kind of design, is it easily ages prematurely with a lot of traffic. It'll get scuffed, it gets some squeaks and ages kind of prematurely. But it still is a quick, easy, down and dirty solution that you can use. It goes on top of any floor. So that's the one method that we see used a lot. This next one is one of the newest methods. It's a pre-wired modular system. And if you look closely at this picture, you'll see those little raised bumps throughout the picture. That's where they're running this low profile pre-wired system, and it comes into what looks like a core drill cover. It's their lowest solution that allows about a 1/4 inch or so, a 1/2 inch raised round circular product that has a cord that then can be plugged into one of their towers, which is more desk height. It looks a lot like flat wire, but it really isn't. It's different because it utilizes specific links, a powered raceway that connect together. It's works really good. It's manufactured by one of the largest commercial furniture manufacturers in our world today, and often it's installed by furniture installers. But I was talking to their person in charge of this whole project for this manufacturer 2 weeks ago, and they are now beginning to expand it into electrical contractors to purchase it through their own electrical distributors. This is new for them, so it's probably going to take some while, but it's there. The advantages are pretty clear. It's low, it's hidden, it has a tower available to bring it to desk height. It works well at collaborative table where only power is needed. The downside is that it only accommodates one single circuit of power and doesn't allow any data or AV or telecommunications cabling in its channel. That becomes its downside. The single complaint that I've heard from people who have used it, and they've come to us in different shows, not that I'm seeking it out because we work closely with this group. In libraries, I was at a library show and I had about 7 or 8 people come up to me and say, one thing we don't like about this is you have to purchase a proprietary plug to make each of those towers work with this option that they're showing. So it's just not any tower that can plug in. You just can't plug in your desk. It is a proprietary plug. The last method, the third method that I want to show you, also allows data cabling in this one. It's pretty unique in that if you look down the middle of that, what looks like wood on the sides, there's an extruded aluminum channel with floor transitions that what looks like wood are actually transition ramps that are bringing it down to the level of the floor so that it becomes not noticeable in a space. It can be the wire channel, the transition ramps around all sides of this space, and it can mount on a concrete floor. You can put as many cables in there as you need, whether it's simply I need a telecommunications cable like the auto manufacturer needed, or I was in one space where they had a lectern, and in that lectern, they needed over 40 Cat cables running to that. And our system was the one they were able to use to actually run all those cables into there along with power. You can have a single circuit up to multiple circuits. So you could power systems furniture, you could power a simple collaborative space. One of the things that this system uses is all pre-wired power. So it requires less than an electrical team to install it. You could use your facilities team to install it, or one of your lower priced trades, and then simply have an electrical contractor make it hot at the end. So it gives you some of that flexibility. I wish we could have answer some questions right now, but I hope you're still there, and we'll type in your questions. The main negative thing about this one, it's not its installation, because you can install it quietly. While you could put it in a meeting room while someone's literally has their office right next to it. It doesn't require that drilling and cutting of the floor. It can literally be glued or taped down. It's not that. The main negative about this is that it isn't warehouse and local distributors. So when you want one of these, you have to call or email, send in a PO, it's shipped the next day. So there might be 2 days or a week delay from the time you order it to get it. That's the main negative about this product. So now that I've introduced these newest trends that are powering many spaces, let me discuss some practical applications of what all this means to you. We're going to look at some specific spaces and the challenges they face. I'm going to look at specific buildings and say, how would you do this? How would you do it in your current space? And here's what they did to bring power and connectivity with them. These images here are just some spaces that were done and to show you some of the flexibility of these situations. The first space is a typical meeting room that you all have. This was a furniture dealer in Portland. It's their own meeting room. It's very typical. You might have something similar to this where you need a monitor, you need an HDMI cable, you need a telecommunications cable, whatever it is, everyone has to have power so they can plug in. And as I mentioned to you, according to the National Electric Code now, you have to have one of these devices hardwired into this space somewhere. So you need these things in your room. This company in Portland ruled out core drilling and trenching. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want the mess. And so what they did is used one of the systems that I mentioned and put it into their space. It looks beautiful. It's one of their designers mentioned this, that I work with customers all day trying to solve the workplace challenge they face in getting power and data distribution to the workstation and collaborative areas, and found this to be superior to anything else on the market. And this was the reason she said that, as it does not create a visual distraction. I won't go into the details of how they did this room, but you can see this is something that is being addressed by the thousands every week. Here is a public library in Michigan, actually, that desperately needed to add technology in their older space, as their patrons kept bringing in their extension cords into the library. So we've seen this often where they're hugging the edge of a classroom, they're hugging the edge of a library, that people are bringing their extension cords. And so this was happening in this library. And the challenge was twofold. They had radiant heat flooring and they couldn't cut into it. And they also, as a public library, had a very limited budget. So it had to be budget-friendly option. So what they were able to do is they were able to connect all the tables from a single existing outlet and bring it out into their library where it was needed. The receptacles are positioned under every table so the patrons could plug in, could stop bringing in their extension cords to get the work done. You can see now by doing this why I'm going to hope that our facility managers do become superheroes, wizards, with the ability to do this in a low budget way and not shutting down the library. But what about things that are more complicated and larger? Let's take a look at Pittsburgh International Airport. Their challenge is all 4 of their concourses are going to be getting new seating. And how do they power up all of those seats? We all travel in airports. We understand this issue. They began with one of their concourses, their international, which is Concourse C, which has an area for over 600 seats. High traffic. They can't afford any trip hazards or costly delays. So they began with a test. They installed 24 feet of product spanning the length of one of their busiest walkways, a couple of feet away from the moving walkway. So this, as it stopped, people walked across one of these new products. For 30 days, everyone got off, they walked on it, the golf carts drove over it. They had to verify that this was durable and that people wouldn't notice it if it was there, and that the equipment would have no effect on it. Next came the furniture, the layout with the Arcona seating plan. The architect, the design team at the airport worked with the manufacturer's design team, make sure that they could provide power for every seat on every surface. You can see this was installed. They had a the wireway and the transition ramps all around it. And they finally installed it over under two surfaces, carpet and luxury vinyl. And they both were used seamlessly. The best way really to show you this is say the next time you fly into Pittsburgh, go to Concourse C, plug in your device because the power will work. All the other concourses eventually will be done just like this when their existing leases are up. So what happens for you facility managers who work in old buildings? I'm going to explain to you what happened to a building that was 107 years old for an architecture department, the School of Architecture at the University in Ohio. They didn't want to risk any damage to this aging structure's foundation by trenching or concrete or core drilling, and yet they wanted to maintain this historical, pristine feel of the building. So they were not going to use power poles. That was a no. But yet they needed the power, and they needed a dual workstation at every desk in this architectural studies historical building. So they brought wireways from the side walls to under the table, feeding the data cables, and the power were routed up the table legs and attached to the tabletop device purchased with the tables. We see this all across North America. This is St. Boniface University in Canada. They had a very similar situation where they needed this classroom powered, but they could not come from the back of the room because of where this radiant heat was on the side walls. So they had to come from the back. I'm sorry, not from the side because of where the radiant heat was. They had to come from the back. And you can see it was allowed to come back and power all this furniture up with no problem. Each desk had 2 students, 2 computer systems. They had all the power and IT cables they needed.
Excuse me, Steve?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Ann. I wanted to jump in with a question that we did receive since you're talking about, you know, an education setting, and
Okay.
you had actually mentioned Canada, which I'm sure this issue, you know, applies to people that are beyond Canada. But we had an attendee send in just kind of a comment about he stopped using in-floor power in an educational setting due to snow and salt being tracked in by occupants, and also maybe people, you know, kicking the boxes and things like that, and they had to move away from that in-floor power. So maybe with the solution you're talking about, could you comment on maybe kind of those issues how your offering stands up to that, whether it be moisture, whether it be weight, things like that, you know, the wear and tear?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
That's a great question because it does get a lot of wear and tear with the northern climates. West Point Academy, which is New York on the Hudson River, they installed an on-floor system, ConnectTrack's on-floor system. Because of that fact, they did around 14 classrooms with the power. And I went to look at that classrooms at the end of the season before they cleaned them. And they had salt and, you know, everything you can imagine in the military, where the boots and everything else. And so our system is able to literally, with just a cloth and a cleaning slide, it just wipes right off and it looks like brand new. So from a cleaning standpoint, it's really easy. Also the top cap, if you have a system where it has an exposed top cap, we've designed it so it pops off. So if you wanted to get inside of it, you could. You don't need to, but you could. As far as the plugs themselves, the monuments, they, according to code, really need to be positioned under a desk or under a table or something like that, so it doesn't become a tripping hazard. And we can't fix that because it's not flat to the floor. It still is a monument there. And I hope that answers that question. I'll keep going, and unless, Ann, you want to jump in anytime, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. No, I'll let you finish out. We do have a few more questions. I'll let you finish the presentation, and then we'll jump into the Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yep. This was a University of Louisville, and I'm just going to do this a little faster so we can get to this. They had a classroom that they were going to be redoing. This was a hall that they wanted to do during Christmas time. They were putting in all this new seating with all the power. The problem was it was going to happen during Christmas break, and they hadn't thought through how are we going to get power to these powered seats. They didn't want to cut through the floor. They didn't want to spend all that time and money. And so what they did is they ran connect track from the back wall all the way to the front of the stage that went over top of the flooring, the hard flooring, as well as the carpeting. And it saved them a lot of money, saved them a lot of time, and yet it happened right during Christmas break. It was an easy, quick install for them. So we do things like that also, and you can use these systems for it. I recognize that some of you probably are not going to have to do big spaces like this, or Pittsburgh Airport, or 13 floors of building, something like that. But you might have something like this. This is a training room. This is a CoStar commercial real estate. They had 3 classrooms in a building they didn't own. They didn't want to spend crazy money on core drills because they're leasing the space, and they knew it was just too expensive. So what they did is they were put in one of these systems. You can see it there. It brought in the power and the data where they needed it, and it became a quick space for them. This here is to show you a little bit of the scope of how these can work and how you can blend systems. This here actually is Vancouver, British Columbia, beautiful city, one of my favorite cities, gorgeous part of our world. Also in Canada, they were remodeling 13 floors, and they needed a variety of systems to make the space how they wanted it. So they needed power in their meeting rooms, and yet they wanted to future-proof it for future technology. And I can address that later if you need to. They also needed to bring in power from the walls to power their system's furniture. So what they actually did, and you can see in these 2 images, on the right, it was actually fed from that electrical manufacturer I mentioned, like a wire mold channel, and fed into a connect track system. So using 2 of the 3 to power their system's furniture. And then on the left, you can see they used a completely under carpet system to hide everything for the conference rooms. I know I could give you many more examples of how we're doing this. I hope this is enough to stir your imaginations, your questions, get you thinking about there are simpler approaches to power and connectivity. A typical conference room with our product takes about 2 hours. It takes about 2 hours. It can be done during a day. It's really simple. It's not complicated. And yet you become the hero. You become the facility manager, wizard, superhero. So less costly, less disruptive. I hope this has helped. I really appreciate your time. And now, Ann, maybe I can address some of the questions you might have had.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. And thank you for the audience for sending in questions that we have received. So yeah, we'll jump right in. We'll do some Q&A, and please continue to send in your questions if you have any. So Steve, I'll just jump back to the actual Connect Track product. We did just get a question on that.
Yep.
Asking what is the height of the Connect Track product? I know you have a few offerings, several offerings. Height of the Connect Track and the width. So what are the dimensions of your offerings?
Sure. Any of these, just so they know, can be obtained on our connecttrack.com website. There's a resources tab, and it details with drawings and everything else. The main system that we use for systems furniture and for the under carpet system, where it's completely hidden, what you feel when you're stepping on it is about a ½ inch from top to the bottom. That's the max feel. It's about a ½ inch. The actual wireway might be a little higher than that, but because the ½ inch of a carpet that offsets that. So yes, about a ½ inch, and the more specific drawings are on our resources tab. The actual width of our product, again, depending on which product you're using, but our under carpet system that completely hides, we have about 34 inches of space. So it's almost 3 feet. And where that helps compared to the other system I showed you with the towers, which is much narrower, because we're spreading it out to 3 feet, it makes it much less noticeable and much less of any sort of a tripping hazard at all. So that's why we have it that wide.
Thank you. And I think you touched on this a little bit in one of your examples earlier, but while we're on the characteristics here, I wanted to ask you about weight limit for the offerings.
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention it earlier. The weight limit on all of our products, because it's a very heavy extruded aluminum with the right amount of bends and tweaks in it, is a 1,000-pound load test. It's tested on a rolling weight, but we have had cars run over it in car showrooms. We've had it furniture sitting right on top of it. So if your leg or your leveler or whatever sits right on the main wireway, that's okay, but it's a 1,000-pound load test.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll switch gears a little bit. We have some questions about the actual performance of the product. And is the system, as far as compliance, so is the system UL compliant, CSA compliant, or any other compliances we should know about?
Sure, it is CSA. So we sell a lot in Canada. It also is ETL listed according to UL. I mean, they're all the same standards. So it's either, it was UL, now it's ETL tested. So it has those standards here in the States and CSA in Canada, for sure.
Thank you. So now, also, what is, as far as, does your product allow for both AC power and low voltage cabling in the same run? How does that work?
Very good. We get asked that a lot, and what it is our system has a wireway, not a raceway, it's a wireway. And in that wireway, our pre-wired power actually goes into a galvanized steel flex conduit. And so that becomes our separation. So in that wireway, you can have that pre-wired galvanized steel flex conduit and your data cables, and there's no interference. We did a project for, it was Airbnb. We've done several floors for them, and I remember working with their AV team, and they had some super high-tech Cisco devices in many of their rooms, and they were testing this very thoroughly. They want to make sure there was no interference at all, and it worked great. So you won't have any problem with it.
Thank you. Thanks. So, you talked about a number of different case studies and projects that you've been out, you've seen in your travels. So I actually wanted to ask you, what is kind of one of the most, one or two of the most, common challenges that you're seeing facilities facing, and how are you addressing that with the product? So what are one or two things you're seeing, and maybe even something that's been emerging that you're looking to address?
Well, one of the things that we see everywhere are these meeting rooms, these conference rooms. Again, I refer to the NEC code, but because that code now is demanding power in the floor, that's one thing. So the code is actually demanding they get rid of their extension cords and they actually have something there, like Connect Rack or one of these other systems we mentioned, or a core drill. And then the second thing that goes along with that is the fact that everyone is either Skyping or has some video conference technology. They're watching, sharing their screens together. So we're seeing this so much in these conference and meeting rooms, even from an inexpensive room that's being redone. And so because of that, it's requiring cables, it's requiring power. And so we are doing literally, thousands of conference rooms and meeting rooms, because that just has to happen according to code and because of use. The second thing what happens almost always with Connect Track is when we've done a conference room or meeting room or collaborative space, all of a sudden they'll say, well, can't we do our office with this? And our answer is obviously yes, you can. It's much more expandable once someone has tested our system, because everyone wants to test it and they've used it in one room, they're like, there's no reason we can't use this throughout our whole facility. And an example of that is one of the largest phone manufacturers that you would know, that we have their computers and phones and everything else. I was walking out of their space as we're doing all their meeting rooms, and it was an older space with power poles, and they said, "You mean we can get rid of all these power poles?" And that's what happens when somebody starts. So those are the things that we're seeing trending: the code, along with the demands, and then the awareness that I can expand much greater than this and save a lot of money and have flexibility.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I have another question before we get to more of a space planning question. What are the length of the runs of the ConnectTrack products?
Mm-hmm. The length of the runs can be whatever you want. We have certain fixed lengths, but for example, our one that goes underneath the carpet come in 4-foot sections. So you can have them as long as you want, and in the field they can be cut. So if you had one that was 16 feet 4 inches, you could do 16 feet 4 inches. And our ones that are exposed on top have an 8 and 4-foot lengths on top. So we can usually put it past a walkway where there's not a seam. It doesn't matter if there's a seam, but we can usually hide it. We have a design team, and we can talk about that maybe with the space planning, that actually does all of this for our customers, so they don't have to think about it, and they'll work with you on that.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, we operate educational facilities, and our open space is always the challenge to get power and data to the ever-changing furniture format, within that open space. So how can ConnectTrack move along with those changes? I know you had talked about, the initial installation. So let's talk about when those things change and are being reconfigured. How does that work?
It all depends on how much change in reconfiguring you are doing. The one thing that we call ConnectTrack is semi-permanent. So we can place it in the space and it can work, but if you're going to change it Friday night, because I'm going to use it differently Monday, that we cannot do, because we're actually putting this semi-permanent space in there. But if you're going to use it for 6 months or a year, and you say, now we're going to change it because we know the space is always changing, then you can reconfigure it to a new space, maybe add, maybe take away, whatever it is. But in education, if you have tables on wheels or desk on wheels, chairs on wheels, where they're moving all over, what we tend to do is we'll create a grid of what you determine are the 4 most popular forms in this room, and then we'll place the monuments in those areas. But if it's often out in space, that's the one limitation where ConnectTrack cannot be removed nightly. It's more of a semi-permanent, and I hope that answers the question. So it's flexible, but not, yeah.
Not like for event space and things like that, and I understand that.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm taking from it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think it looks like we have time for one more question. I want to thank everyone for sending their questions in. Let's see, we'll go to one more, and we'll round it out with asking how ConnectTrack can be specified. I know you talked about as far as what trades may need to be taken in and out, or even a facilities team doing this themselves. But can you just talk about the process if someone was interested in ConnectTrack? How do they specify that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for your questions. Have been very helpful. So ConnectTrack, the best way to for a facility team is to contact ConnectTrack first at quote@connecttrack.com. And that is our global care team takes those with specific questions. You can put in their questions, and we'll give it to the right person in the office, whether that's a design team or a business team or global care team. And they will help you get your design right, because we want to make sure you're comfortable. We want to know that sometimes somebody will just order our material and it might be overkill. Maybe they don't need that much. And so we want to help you with that. And at that point, once it's there, we have, from an install standpoint, generally speaking, not all facility managers have an electrician on staff. If you do, it's very easy. You can coordinate it with the electrical contractor, whichever team you want to do it. We have flooring teams that actually install our product. The airport I mentioned to you, and we've done other airports, but Pittsburgh Airport was installed. The electrician put the electrical, but the actual waterway and transition ramps were done by a flooring installer. We have furniture teams. If you work with a furniture dealer that does installation, and so it's a variety of installers across the country. It's just at some point you do need an electrical contractor to, when we have this pre-wired power, to make it hot when it goes to the junction box. That's all. And so the best start is to start with us, and then we will take it from there, and we will suggest either where you can purchase it or purchase it direct, whatever you want to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks very much for your presentation today. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you all. I appreciate you being here.
And I would like to, of course, thank our audience for their attendance and for the questions that all of you sent in, and to ConnectTrack for sponsoring this webinar. A recording of this webinar will be available online at facilityexecutive.com if you'd like to share it or listen again. And again, you will get an email from us about certificate of attendance that you can use for continuing education credits. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.